I am already lining up some pretty good guests, and I'll be announcing that as I go forward. It's turning out to be a pretty interesting segment to do a show, to do a live show. So let me just call up the number here. One of the things that's interesting about this is that I am in a position where I can take phone calls live and interactive, just like a radio station. If you'd like to join the program, you could do that at 617 396 4958. That number again is 617 396 4958. I'm also taking chats. That number again is 617. I just shut that down. I'm taking chats on the YouTube. So if you'd like to join me by chat and you're listening live on YouTube, you are welcome to join the conversation. I'm looking forward to having this kind of late evening Eastern time live experience where we can interact, where we can talk, we could get into issues, have interesting guests. And once my website is up, and that should happen any day now, I will be able to show how you can listen to the program from about 12 different live streams and about 30 different audio and audio visual sites, including the big ones. And, it's going to be something that I'll be promoting through the already existing sites as I learn to tap into various audiences in those sites, and then gradually expanding out to some other sites. But I think I've got enough to work with, quite frankly. And I am really looking forward to the launch. The program is sponsored by my books, which are available at Amazon Books. I'm the author of almost 20 books, my most recent being The Satanic Conspiracy and Sociology for Conservatives. That's my latest. Right now, I am a student of sociology. I am majoring in sociology at Bunker Hill Community College in Boston, where I live. Now, I want to get into one issue tonight. I'm not going to stay on long, but I just really feel compelled to talk about this. David is a regular guest of mine. He's a YouTube host, and I heard him making some slight inferences to this issue. And then I took a look at the Culture Wars magazine online, which is published by Dr. E. Michael Jones, who has been a regular guest of mine. And sure enough, he has an article about this same issue, and that is that there is this ongoing, and I don't know if it's increasing, but I have a feeling that it probably is, tendency to deny the Nazi Holocaust against the Jews, the final solution. And I am absolutely outraged that this is happening. There is no excuse for this. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that people should be facing criminal charges if they do it. I know that is the case in Germany, and for good reason in Germany. I'm not sure that should be what's going on here. So I'm not advocating that. But the whole idea of it is beyond belief to me. It is anti-Semitic because of its motivation, and it's wrong. I want to, well, before I address where Dr. Jones is coming from, and I'm probably going to have him back on my show. I'll invite him. I don't know if I have the nerves right now to deal with this, frankly, but we'll see. um, the issue right on the face of it, on the surface of it, is simply this. To deny the Holocaust by the Nazis against the Jews of Europe would be like denying that the North, the Union won the Civil War, or denying that the American patriots defeated the British at Yorktown and declared an independent republic. It's insane. It doesn't make any sense. It's really not appropriate. It's settled history. The Nazi Holocaust happened. And 6 million Jews lost their life, probably more than that, actually. And to deny that is simply denying well researched, well documented facts of history. It is already, we should be beyond that. The research, the documentation, the testimony, the scholarly work, the archives of the Nazis themselves, the research in all of the occupied Nazi nations. And let's not forget, the Nazis at the height of their power occupied all of Europe pretty much between Hitler and his allies, the Italians and the Hungarians and a couple of others. He occupied all the way from the border of Spain in the Pyrenees right up to the Volga River, and all the way from North Africa and the gates of Egypt right up to the North Pole. So, you have to track this in all of the nations that Hitler occupied. And the other factor with regard to the Nazi Holocaust is that the death toll is not just the deaths that occurred in the death camps and in the concentration camps, which were probably about 3 to 4 million. And that's very well documented because the Nazis kept scrupulous records. But it's also the indiscriminate killing of Jews and others, but in this case, I'm talking about the Jews, by Nazi pogroms, starting with the Kristallnacht in 1938. The Kristallnacht was not just, Nazi thugs with government sanction looting Jewish businesses and burning Jewish neighborhoods, sort of like back last summer with the way Antifa and Black Lives Matter was doing in black neighborhoods. It was more than that. It was killing Jews all over the place, tens of thousands of them, and carting them off to death camps or concentration camps. The death camps had not yet been built yet in 1938. But the way that would work would be that there would be a call up, and this happened throughout the war, both in Germany and in the occupied areas, particularly Poland, where Jews would be concentrated in a ghetto, and then they would be called up to the city hall to turn in their property. And in the course of that, we're talking about families, elderly people, children. They'd be dragged out of their homes and they'd have to go to the city hall where they would have to wait in line or some municipal building. Nazis would be there whipping them and beating them and killing them, murdering people. There were dead bodies everywhere. And it got worse and worse as the war progressed, to the point where, you had a situation like and this is constant throughout Poland, where you would have a call up. The Jews would be called into the town square to report. They would come in the middle of the night, and drag out into the town square. And the elderly, the infirm, the little children who couldn't come out, the Nazis would systematically go around and murder them all. We're talking about tens of thousands of people at a shot. You had them call out, they would call out people into the town square, and they would say, well, we need workers to dig a mine or to dig ditches or to help build a highway. So they would round up, like 400 or 500 men, maybe women too, if they looked able-bodied, and they would take them off in trucks, and they would never be seen again, right? They'd be murdered eventually. Maybe they'd work them to death. They would turn into it was a slave situation. This is a resurrection of slavery in our own time, in modern times. And you also had, forced starvations and typhus and disease. These were conscious policies by a state engaging in social engineering. Let's call it what it is. And the result of those things was the deaths of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. I mean, Anne Frank died from typhus. Typhus is a disease that happens when a person is weakened, when they're crowded together, when they're dealing with starvation, when they're put in a prison, when their immune system becomes weakened, and they're vulnerable to these kinds of epidemics, and you have mass death. That is all part of the number. All of those people were killed by the Nazis because that would not have happened otherwise. We should understand that not only was the Nazi Holocaust against the Jews anti-Semitic, of course, because anti-Semitism was the driving force of it, and it got worse and worse right up to the end of the war, even as the Nazis were retreating, across the Rhine, and as the Russians were showing up in Warsaw, they were still, killing as many Jews as they could. They actually, were hurting their own war effort by this distraction of killing the Jews. And by the way, we could get into a whole different subject of how it is that the surrounding nations, the United States, the free nations, slammed the door on Jews fleeing the Nazis and leaving them there. That's another subject. I'm not even talking about that. You had the situation where, you had an organized, coordinated mass murder machine. This was a unique event in history. Yes, more people probably died and did die as a result of Soviet, Russian, forced starvations and gulags. More people died by the hand of Mao Zedong with the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. More numbers died. I am not in any way dismissing that. I'm only noting that the uniqueness of the Holocaust against the Jews was because it was not just done. And look, any death is equally horrendous, of course. It was not just done by, in the case of the Soviets, people who were seen as, quote, enemies of the state, and it was a political thing, or it was a social thing. They wanted to get rid of groups that opposed the government and that opposed their agendas. This was done based upon what was perceived to be a race, that being the Jewish people, who were declared as such, a race based on blood. And because of that, and because of the thoroughness and the high-tech element of this, the way the Nazis did it so methodically, the way they actually felt they were being humane by creating death camps, this makes this a unique event in history, unlike any other. There has never been such a massive, systematic targeting and murdering of a particular people based upon their ethnicity, their religion. Never before, and God willing, never again. And when I say that, I say not only do I beseech God in heaven, I also understand that we as imperfect human beings, we're responsible for this. We become possessed of the satanic influence. And we have to understand that as a way to keep it in check and hopefully drive it out of our midst. So the very idea that we would have people now questioning the Holocaust, don't they realize that it's not just the fact that it's anti-Semitic, but it's also opening the door for sort of similar social experiments done by socialistic dictatorships. Hitler was a socialist, let's not forget. Whole different subject. I'm not going to go there right now. I've actually written a book about this called Was Hitler a Leftist? You can look it up. But the point is, it was a social experiment that involved the demonization of a group of people officially by a government. We're not talking about just, prejudice or people don't like their neighbor. And, we're talking about a coordinated, conscious, legalized demonization of an entire group of people based upon an appeal to fear and an appeal to greed. The Jews are rich, the Jews control the world, and therefore the Jews have ripped us off, and we are entitled to get back what they ripped off by taking it from them. And we're asking the government to do it. This is the siren song of socialism, right? The guy down the street has more than you do. He has a bigger car than you have. He's got a nicer, prettier wife than you have. He's got a bigger house than you have. It's not fair. Why should he have more than I have? And so you want the government to say, this is unequal, this is unjust, and you want them to go in there and seize the property. It appeals to a dark side of all of us. We like to see successful people torn down, knocked off their pedestal. We all have a tendency in that way. But the problem is that we, in this country, we have a system of government and we have a system of checks and balances and a system of a social contract that protects everyone's property, whether you're rich, middle class, or poor, because we want to be protected. It's just it's the system we have. So when you have a government that appeals and says those people have something that you deserve, why do you deserve it? Who knows? Because you exist. That's why. This is the appeal. You didn't do anything to deserve it. You just deserve it because they have it and you want it, and it bothers you. It reminds you, maybe some people who have inferior feelings and who have low self-esteem. They feel like, oh, I'm a failure because that person is more successful than me. Therefore, if I take from him what he has, I'll feel better. Or at least if I see him brought down, maybe I'm not going to get any of the loot, but I'll still feel better because I won't be reminded of my own failures, right? Okay, we're talking about an appeal to a very dark side of human nature. And when that happens by a government, that's when you have problems. And that's what socialism is. And that's what it does. It basically appeals to that side of our nature as a way for them to come to power and to erode the rights of all individuals. And that's exactly what the Nazis were all about. So if we're going to have people denying the Holocaust, we're going to have them denying the mechanism, the political, philosophical mechanism that went behind the Holocaust. And it is a much bigger and much more complicated question than mere anti Semitism, because it could be any group that could be targeted in the future. It could be unvaccinated people. Who knows? I'm not going to go there, but I'm just saying it could be anyone. Now, Dr. E. Michael Jones is a brilliant man, and I have admired his work for years. I started reading his work when he sent me a copy, probably it was 10 years ago, of a book called Degenerate Moderns. And I was enthralled by it. It was like, this is so, he was such a great critic and observer of our culture and what makes us tick and what brings us down. And, I remember interviewing him. And then I kind of got out of the business of doing radio for a couple of years there. I was doing other things. I was running a business. I was having a child. I was having a family. I just was busy with other things. And then I got back into it maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. I started to get back into radio. And I decided to look up Dr. Michael Jones and said, oh, okay, there's a good guest. I hadn't heard from him in a long time. And I was appalled to see that he has gone down this Jewish stuff. He's reading a book called The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, and that he was into Jewish conspiracy theories. And so I looked into this, and eventually I did have him on my show many times, still do. And what he's embraced is an old-fashioned, and look, I'm going to be blunt here. I'm not going to mince words. He's embraced an old-fashioned Christian notion that because the Jews as a group, as our entire people, we're responsible for killing Jesus, right? Allegedly. And we could get into that. And thus we are damned. We have what Dr. Jones says, we are revolutionaries because we're rebelling against the Messiah, because he says we don't have logos. In other words, which is ridiculous, of course, because logos is the very essence of the Torah, right? The idea of reason and the idea of an order of the universe and of a knowledge of God. And I mean, of course, it's absurd to suggest that the Jews don't have logos. We're the essence of logos. We've been walking with God a long time, 1,000 years before Jesus. We were walking with God. we were trying to bring godliness to the world. Imperfectly, of course, because all humans are imperfect. And there were periods of great success followed by periods of great sin. But the entire essence of Judaism is logos, the merge between a belief in a creator of the universe and a lawgiver and the existing social order, the order of existence, of reality, of morality, of the order of proper behavior between people and between nations. And yet his views do reflect a strain that has run through Christianity from the time after Jesus was crucified right up till today. And I would suggest it was not universal to Christianity. I think that it was a part of it. I think it waxed and waned. There were periods of very good relations with Jews and periods of bad relations. It depended a lot actually on politics. But the one thing that Dr. Jones in his thesis does note is that St. Augustine of Hippo, the author of The Kingdom on a Hill and a brilliant theologian, influenced everyone, including Judaism. He came up with this concept, and this was around the time of the fall of Rome, of the Latin term for it is sicut Judaeus non, or sicut Judaeus. In other words, it set up a system by which the Jews of Europe and of Christendom would expect protection because we were the people of the book, because we still worshiped God, and therefore the Christian was forbidden to harm us and to interrupt our worship. But it was a double-edged sword, because at the same time, because we did not accept Jesus, and because we were implicated in the crucifixion of Jesus, which is something that I would debate in another time, even if we were, I would debate collective punishment. And by the way, I mean, just to briefly say, in all honesty, the Pharisees, who were not in a position to crucify anyone at that time, it was the Romans, they might have advocated that Jesus be crucified because they didn't believe he was the Messiah. And therefore, they felt that he was not only a heretic, but that he was a threat to the logos, if you will, of Judea, which at that time was undergoing extreme oppression from the Romans, which had created, up until that time, the largest, the most totalitarian, the most brutal empire the world had ever seen. Putting that aside, though, that's not what I want to talk about here. I want to point out that this system of Sicut Judaeus, where the Jews would be allowed to worship their God, they would be allowed to, not to conduct their affairs, yet they would be second-class citizens in European countries because they had not accepted Jesus. They would, and the Christians were encouraged to not have too much contact with us because we had a bad influence, because we were in rebellion, because we didn't accept Jesus. We were, like Dr. Jones says, we lacked logos, according to this view. And on the one hand, this was probably responsible for our survival. We were able to exist in European cities and even in the European countryside. And at times we were able to thrive. We found our place in Europe. We were able to develop, in many cases, symbiotic relations with European princes and kings and dukes and rulers, because we were outside of the Christian juridical system, and we were allowed to engage in certain activities that were shunned by and discouraged by the Christian establishment, but they were activities that were needed in order for these kings to continue their states. Things like trading and diplomacy and banking and doctors and artisans and all sorts of fields. But it was always dangerous because of there'd be an occasional massacre and there'd be an occasional bad king. The point I'm making is that this system of Sicut Judaeus non began to recede as a result of the Enlightenment and of the Age of Reason. And Jews began to become enfranchised, particularly in the United States, of course. And while the Protestant churches started out as severe as Roman Catholicism, nevertheless, they began to reform a little faster than the Roman Catholics, and Jews were allowed to become enfranchised and equal citizens. There was less of a fear that we were going to try to, revolutionize, or we were going to do something horrible because we hadn't accepted Jesus. This was an age when people were accepted as individuals, and that an individual could either be good or bad, and that the idea of collective guilt against any group of people receded into the background, including within Judaism, may I note. I mean, we were also, affected by the Enlightenment. The final end, I would suggest, in Christianity of this idea of Sicut Judaeus Non was the Holocaust. Not because Christianity is to blame for the Holocaust. It's not. It's a very complicated issue. The Nazis were almost as anti-Christian as they were anti-Jewish. They embraced this kind of like pagan, neo-pagan, New Age Nordic ideal. The Nazi elite did anyway. They tolerated Christianity, but I think there's a lot of evidence, including stuff that was documents that were taken by Bill Donovan, the head of the OSS, after the war, which indicate that the Nazis did plan eventually to annihilate Christianity after they had annihilated Judaism. So they were not pro-Christian. I don't believe they were at all. And they were socialists in the same way that the Bolsheviks were atheists. They were agnostic, I think, when it came to God, but they were not into the Judeo-Christian code of morality and the brilliant Christian religion, which transmitted the Judaic methods and added to it and contributed to the flowering of a civilization that would eventually find, I think, its apex in the establishment of the United States. What happened however, and I don't think we can step away from this, the idea of Sicut Judaeus did influence the Nazis. It was it was obviously isolated and turned into an extremist idea. Maybe in the same way that communism, I think, created radical Islam by taking certain extreme ideas within the Quran that were not common to Muslims up until maybe shortly around World War I and the Young Turks, and then you had, the Bolsheviks and the influence, where they created a radicalized form of Islam. I think that some of these ideas, that the Jews, were collectively responsible for killing Christ, and that we were, killing God and that kind of thing, which I dispute. But putting that aside, even if they did back then, do you blame somebody now? I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's a collective attack against innocent people. And it's insane, actually, frankly. I'm sorry to say that, and I don't mean that to be in any way seen as derogatory. And I have enormous respect for Christianity and for Jesus. The point is that this tendency to view Jews as separate and as a bad influence was metastasized and magnified by the socialistic and evolutionary ideas of Nazism. The Nazis did not see Jews as an inferior race. That's a myth that's made its rounds, including amongst Jews. They actually believed that the Jews were as evolved, if not more evolved, than the Aryans, which is why they saw them as an enemy, that they felt they had to get rid of them. Bringing things up to now, I would contend that the idea of Sicut Judaeus Non has disappeared, for all intents and purposes, from Christianity because of the Holocaust, because of World War II, because in their heart of hearts, Christians have recoiled from that, and they do understand at a very deep level that those ideas were contributing to that horror, that inhumane, amoral activity, which actually runs completely contrary to Christianity and to the Christian faith and to what Christians believe. But it was an element of Christianity that was turned into something very, very, very dark. It contributed to something which became very dark. And so, therefore, after the war, Christianity moved away from it. And I think that culminated in the Vatican II Council and really a backing away from this idea that the Jewish people were to be held collectively guilty for the death of Jesus. All right. And that's, I think, something that has been universally accepted by Christianity. And yet, Dr. Jones and some of the people around him who are now saying, and by the way, he's not saying it, but his newspaper, the Culture Wars, has an article that does almost say this. They think that somehow the fact that Christianity has backed away from these concepts of the Sicut Judaeus non, that Jews have to be second-class citizens, they can't be heard. I couldn't do this program if we had that. That Jews can't be heard, that this is a Jewish conspiracy, that the Jews influenced Vatican II, that Jews influenced Christianity to get rid of this. I think that insults Christianity. That insults Christians. Of course, Jews don't want the Christians to have this. But Christianity itself became aware, the Christian people, the Christian faith, the Christian doctrine, the Christian way of life became aware of the dangers and the negativeness and the immorality of that concept in this day and age. Maybe it worked in the Dark Ages, sure. Maybe it worked in the Middle Ages, because it may have even saved Jewish lives back then. But after the Enlightenment, and especially after the Holocaust, it no longer works, and it's evil at this point. And it's been rejected, not because of a Jewish conspiracy, but because Christians, Christian men and women of conscience, have recognized that this had to be they had to let go of that, and that had to change. And that ultimately the best model moving forward, quite frankly, and the one that I think has changed Christianity and Judaism, is the American model. America is a Christian country. More specifically, America is a Protestant country, I may add, in terms of our philosophy, our ethics, our morals, our social order. And that social order has basically recognized that the individual under God has a limited degree of sovereignty, which they then grant to a state to protect and defend that sovereignty. That you don't have any group of people who are particularly blessed or cursed. You have individuals under God, and that the mission of the Jewish people is different than the mission of the Christian people, but it's equally valid. We, as I've said, we want to know God and bring God to the earth by example and by study and by prayer and by education and by knowledge and by exposing evil. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. That's my message to those who want to deny the Holocaust, which I think is despicable. And I mean, I've had people actually contact me and ask me, do I want to debate the Holocaust? No, I don't. It's fact. It's history. I'd like to talk about why people are rejecting that. And I want to expose that and ask them with a sense, in a spirit of love, not in a spirit of confrontation, to just think about it and reconsider that line of reasoning. Think about what that might mean. socially, politically, spiritually, both for their own people and in their own lives. So, on that note, I'm going to say good night, everyone. Charles Moscowitz. I want to just tell you that the program is launching officially after the first of the year. I will be on the air Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Standard Time. I'm here in Boston, and I will be taking calls. I will be taking chats. I will be having on a long list of very interesting guests that I'm in the process of lining up. And I'm looking forward to doing this. So thank you very much for joining me, everyone. I just want to again mention the program is sponsored by myself. I don't have sponsors. I sponsored from my books. Let me just hold up one of my books, The Satanic Conspiracy, The Spectre Haunting Mankind, available at Amazon Books, as is my latest book, Sociology for Conservatives. Check it out at Amazon Books. God bless all of you. God bless America. Merry Christmas, and have a wonderful evening, everybody.